We were lucky enough to get a windfall of sweet chestnuts the other day. Literally a windfall. These were blown down by Storm Amy. I want to preserve some of these. So there's a French confection called Marrons Glacés where it's chestnuts preserved in syrup, candied in syrup. I want to make something a bit like that today, except instead of sugar syrup, I'm going to use apple juice. Not just apple juice as it comes, I'm going to reduce this down to a syrup and use that. So big shallow pan on the heat and the apple juice goes in. This is the apple juice I got from that orchard event that I made some cider with in a previous video. So this lot has been in the freezer between then and now. Is that going to fit? I think I'll stop about there. Just give it a little bit of space to boil. We're going to reduce this down to a thick syrup. It's already about 11%, 12% sugar. We're going to reduce it down to about a quarter of its volume, so it'll be about 40% sugar. I'm going to pick out the biggest and most plump examples of these chestnuts. These are not as big as the cultivated chestnuts you might use normally, I think, for making marrons glacés, but hopefully if I pick the biggest, roundest ones, they'll do. These are about as big as you'd get from just a random, not especially cultivated chestnut tree here in the UK. They are very nice chestnuts. They're just not quite as big as the cultivated kind. I hesitate to call them wild because this is not a native species, I don't think. They are introduced. Naturalised is probably the proper term.
Studio Shrimp here with a quick safety note on distinguishing sweet chestnuts, which are edible and delicious, from superficially similar horse chestnuts, also variously known as conkers or buckeyes, which are inedible and toxic. The trees themselves look superficially similar. They do have differences, but I'm going to focus on the differences between the nuts. The casing that sweet chestnuts come out of is densely spiny, and the spines are needle sharp. This casing stays in one piece and opens like a flower. The inside of the casing, after the nuts fall out, is silky or velvety. The casing for horse chestnuts is covered with stubby spikes, although in some species and varieties there are no spikes at all. This casing falls apart into segments, and the inside is initially white and clammy and moist, drying to a leathery texture. Sweet chestnuts are usually teardrop shaped. The shell is marked with a pattern of stripes or lines running from bottom to top. Horse chestnuts are usually spherical, or sometimes hemispherical, and are marked with a pattern of swirls and curves like walnut veneer, although this fades as they dry out. The scar on sweet chestnuts is elongated or oblong. It's pale brown and rough and looks a bit like cork. At the opposite end from the scar, the fruit comes to a little point, often bearing a small brush-like tuft. Horse chestnuts have a scar that's usually nearly circular, and it's initially covered with a whitish bloom. When that dries and wears away, the scar is smooth. Horse chestnuts have no pointed end and no little tuft. Sweet chestnuts are edible cooked or raw, although if you eat one raw, you might find the inner pith initially dries out your mouth with its astringency. I find that if you just keep chewing, they quickly turn sweet as your saliva starts to break down the starches. Horse chestnuts or conkers or buckeyes are toxic. They contain saponins that will make you ill if you were to eat them. Although some people use them to make a sort of natural soap, and I believe there are traditional methods of leaching out the bad stuff to make them technically edible, but I don't recommend trying that. Back now to kitchen shrimp.
Right, that'll probably do to be going on with. Now I need to peel these chestnuts. Now, there are various methods to do this that involve boiling them for a short period, and I've tried that before, and with the small chestnuts we get here in the UK, they very often fall apart. Even if you boil them for just a very short time to soften the shells, they very often, the chestnut inside just crumbles apart. Just because they're quite small, they cook too easily. So I'm doing the more laborious method here of peeling them when they're just completely cold and raw, just by slipping a knife underneath the shell and pulling it off in pieces like that. I wouldn't recommend you do that with your fingernails because chestnut shells are very good at getting underneath fingernails, and that can be quite painful. So yeah, I'm just using the point of a little paring knife like this, and then when I've got them peeled, they're going straight into some cold water. But yeah, I tried to make these a few years ago, just standard Marron glacé, and I fell at the first hurdle because the instructions said to just score a little cross in the top of the shell and then boil them for 10 minutes. And I did that, and by the time I got to peeling them, they were like kind of baked potatoes inside, and it was impossible to use them. So this time I'm doing it the hard way, being very careful not to stick the knife into myself, of course. It may not look like that on camera. The camera sometimes does odd things with angles regarding knives. So in case you're worrying that I'm putting my fingers at risk here, I really don't feel that I am. I hope it doesn't look like I am, but I don't believe I am. They're very nice chestnuts, and at the moment they've still got their kind of inner pith on them. I will blanch them very briefly to get that off. Anyway, got to do this. We'll check in on the apple juice again in a minute. Yeah, that one's no good. It's got something going on inside of it, so we'll get rid of that. Meanwhile, over here, the apple juice is just gently bubbling away and reducing. That's not all of it. I couldn't fit it all in the pan. So once this is reduced down sufficiently, I'll put the rest of the juice in and continue reducing it until we've got a syrup. So yeah, really not too much of a chore to peel them this way. Just slide the knife underneath the shell like that, and it comes away in strips like a banana peel almost. Okay, I think that's probably enough. I'm going to blanch them in boiling water just by pouring boiling water over them, just to take off the skins, because that inner pith sometimes goes grey when you cook it. Slight change of plan. I've put it in a smaller pan on a smaller ring because it actually boils more vigorously here. That big frying pan with the big surface area in theory is good, but the bottom of the pan's really shiny, and it causes this ceramic stovetop to cycle off because it's reflecting heat back down to the element. And so yeah, a pan with a darker bottom, this has got a copper bottom, it's actually probably quite blackened from age and use. This pan gets hotter and boils more rapidly. In fact, I've just had to turn this down. So anyway, we're going to continue reducing in here, which is also the pan I'm going to candy the chestnuts in, so I can stay in this pan as soon as it's reduced. I've decided that actually, since I'm here in the kitchen watching that pot anyway, and after these chestnuts have been soaked, I'm going to scrape off that inner pith. It comes off a lot easier once they've been soaked. Since I'm standing here watching the pot of syrup reduce, I might as well just do this. It'll save me risking these chestnuts falling apart by trying to boil this off. So that's what we're going to do now. Gentle scrape all over to get this inner pith off the nuts. I probably won't succeed in getting it all off, but most of it will do. It occurs to me if I had a new or clean nail brush, that would probably do it. Could probably just scrub this off. But yeah, this inner pith is quite astringent. When you roast chestnuts, this just turns to sort of papery dust and comes away with the shells. But too much of it when you're just eating the already peeled nuts is going to taste bad. So I'll scrape the worst of it off. Yeah, let's see, that one, for some reason, peeled with almost none of the inner skin adhering. I think that one was really fresh out of the shell. This might have been one of the chestnuts where we actually had to roll the spiky shell underfoot to get the chestnut out. Keeping a close eye on that pan, just because we will very quickly go from syrup to toffee, and apple toffee, whilst that might be quite interesting, it's kind of apple toffee rather than toffee apples, might be an interesting thing to do. It's not the objective today. Just put that one on the list for future experimentation. Okay, that was quite laborious and it's not perfect, but it's done. So these are the chestnuts after scraping. Yeah, some of them just haven't quite come as clean as I might have liked, but we'll just run with it. The syrup has finished reducing and it is very syrupy. So yeah, that's the syrup, and well, it's still quite hot, so you can't really judge the consistency, but that has reduced down to about a quarter of its original volume, which means it's 4 times its original strength. I'll just cool that down. Very syrupy. I suppose just for the sake of science, I will take a little sample of that not much. And I'll test that with the refractometer later. But now these chestnuts are going to be drained, and then those go straight into there. And I'm going to cook them in the syrup. That's not the normal method. So normally with marron glacé, you'd cook them first, you'd boil them a little bit first, and then you'd put them in the syrup. I'm just fearful that these are going to fall apart, so we're going to cook them directly in the syrup. So in case you're familiar with making marron glacé already, and you're looking at this thinking this is not authentic, you're right, this is an experiment. One thing I nearly forgot to add, I'm going to have a little bit of cinnamon in there, just like about half a teaspoonful, because apple and cinnamon and nuts I just think is going to go very well. Just try and get that dispersed into the syrup. And I don't want to boil this hard because this syrup will boil hot, but I want to just bring this to about 100 degrees Celsius. There we go. Right, so I'm going to hold it at that temperature by, if necessary, just lifting it off the heat. The syrup is capable of getting hotter than boiling water, and I don't want the chestnuts to burn, so I'm just going to simmer them in here. I may present this in one of two different ways. I may take the chestnuts out, let them be glacé nuts, you know, like marron glacé, and serve them in little paper cases with sugar dusted on them. Or I might pour the whole lot, once it's cooked and candied, into a jar and have chestnuts preserved in apple and cinnamon syrup. Okay, that's the 15 minutes, and I can feel that they're not as hard as they were. Just don't sound or feel when I tap them like this. They don't feel quite as resilient as they did before. I'm going to give another 5 minutes and then we turn the heat off. But yeah, these are definitely cooking. I'm just giving them a little jiggle just to make sure none of them are cooking unevenly. Push them around so that they all get a turn in the middle, that sort of thing. Meanwhile, this little sample of apple syrup is now at room temperature. So I get to use my refractometer again, twice in 1 month. Put a little bit on there, bows it down. Okay. Oh wow, it's off the scale. There it is. The entire scale is white. That means we've got more than 40% sugar, more than 40% by weight. So the bricks scale is the grams of sugar in 100 grams of sample. So there's more than 40, well more than 40, probably 50 grams of sugar, and it tastes fantastic. Just concentrated appliness. I'm not going to try squishing them or anything, but those are definitely softer to the touch than they were. So heat goes off, lid goes on, and that is just going to go off the heat now. And that'll be allowed to cool down to room temperature. It'll sit like that overnight. I might put it in the fridge, but probably not because it might set. And then tomorrow I've got to bring it to the boil again. I've got to do that for 3 more days. As those chestnuts were cooking, steam will have come out of them and it will have opened little pores in the chestnuts. And in theory, as they cool down, syrup will be drawn into the chestnuts, preserving the insides. And every time we do this heat and cool cycle, in theory, we're driving more syrup inside them. So, see you tomorrow. Today is tomorrow. These have been sitting there for now 24 hours. Interestingly, they've sunk and the syrup has turned a deep red-brown colour. I think that's a reaction between those little bits of pith and the acid in the apple juice. Because when I boil chestnuts in water, it goes kind of greyish purple. And I think that pith on the outside of the chestnuts is probably a pH indicator. So this is acidic, so it's gone red. But now I need to bring them to the boil and then leave them for another 24 hours. So the fact that they've sunk may mean one of several things. It might mean that they have lost moisture, so some of the water has been osmotically drawn out into the syrup. It might be that the syrup's been diluted by that. So those are both the same thing. So the syrup could have become less dense, the chestnuts might have become more dense. Or it could just be that syrup has found its way inside the chestnuts and made them heavier. You know, filled up all the little voids that might have been air in there. And now they're not floaty anymore. Okay, well, their appearance, actually, I didn't want to stir them until I saw them bubble up. They've definitely soaked up some of this syrup, so that's good. I'm going to turn that down, simmer them for about 5 minutes, then lid on and leave it for another 24 hours. Okay, so heat off. Yeah, we can see that they've floated up, which probably means the steam inside them has expanded a bit, which is good because as they cool, that will hopefully draw more syrup inside them. So lid on, and we'll set that aside until the next day. The next day is now the present day, and I just need to do all of that again. So I need to bring this to the boil the chestnuts for long enough that they're warm throughout, and then leave it to cool again. Just to note though, this syrup is now getting quite thick. I might need to dilute this just to make sure it doesn't set into hard caramel. However, I'm going to take a small sample of this syrup while it's cold, because I have an idea. Anyway, I'll boil this with the lid on so that we don't lose too much more moisture. Meanwhile, while we're waiting for that to boil, which you may be able to hear happening in the background, this is the idea I was thinking. I just want to have a quick taste of this syrup with some ice cream. Waffles as well obviously would be, would be great, but I just want to see what this syrup is like with sweet things such as ice cream. Oh god, very, very fruity and intense, and the cinnamon and chestnut flavors are in there as well. So if there is any spare syrup at the end of this, it's going to go in a little bottle. You might do this properly with pancakes or waffles or whatever. So as before, we're not just going to bring those to the boil. I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes just to make sure the chestnuts are completely heated through before we allow it to cool again. Okay, 5 of your feeble earth minutes have passed. That's going to come off the heat, and then we just wait for that to cool down, and again we're going to leave that overnight. Nothing much more we can do now except wait for the morrow. Good morrow to you. So these chestnuts, this is going to be their last time boiling. Wow, look how thick that syrup has become. Okay, here we go. This pan, by the way, in case you're interested, Jenny's just cooking some apples. While that's happening, I'm just going to preheat the oven to pretty much as low as it'll go. So all of the books that I've looked at for this say put your oven on very cool and leave the door slightly open. But this oven does go cooler than most older ovens will anyway. So I'm just going to put this on to 50 Celsius and get it preheating. This is just really going to get it nice and warm without really cooking things further. So those are boiling. As always, we'll give them 5 minutes and then turn them off. Okay, time's up. So I'll turn that off, take them off the heat. I'm just going to let them cool down a little bit to make them safer to handle. Those have had a few moments to cool. I'll take them out and arrange them on this parchment paper on a tray. So we're going to be putting them in the oven, but really only to dry them out. These are considerably darker in colour than you would expect from Marrons Glacés, because this syrup is boiled apple juice. There is also the cinnamon in there, I suppose, but largely this is because this is apple juice. The acidity of the apple juice has reacted with the chestnuts, the pith in the chestnuts, to create some of this colour, but some of this is just caramelisation as well. So it's possible these will have a kind of toffee apple flavour. And some of these are broken. Some of them have just fallen apart in the syrup. So I think I might just keep those aside and we can have a sneaky taste. That tray is going to go off into that cool oven now, and it's going to sit in there for at least half an hour, probably an hour, to dry out. This syrup is going to go into a jar. Oh, there's a little bit of chestnut in there as well, never mind. And that, when it's cooled, I will probably keep that in the fridge because I didn't bother sterilising the jar. Okay, so these broken pieces of chestnut, and I can already see, by the way, on camera that they look a lot darker on the camera screen than they do here. They're just a very, very deep red brown in person. More like the colour you're seeing this syrup, actually. Right, well, let's have a look. So, very delicate and soft now. That's why they've fallen apart. Consistency a bit like fudge. Flavour like, well, flavour nutty, but also like gummy apple sweets. Really actually quite good. Okay, so these have been drying in the oven for an hour now. Couple of points here. One is that I don't think these are actually going to dry out properly without burning. I know that there are going to be people looking at this video saying you burnt the caramel. I promise you there are no burnt flavours here. This is just very dark syrup because of the apple juice starting off from quite a rich brown colour. So yeah, I know these look burnt, but there is no caramel toffee flavour here at all, in fact. I'm going to let these cool a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to try and dry these out. I think I might actually put them back in the syrup and store them in the syrup and use them as candied chestnuts in syrup. So yeah, that being the case, half of this syrup is going to go into this container. And yeah, if that was just sugar caramel, that would taste really burnt, probably. But it just doesn't. It just tastes incredibly strongly apple flavour. So these chestnuts are going to go in that jar. So I've got a couple that I'll keep out. I will taste these on their own. And then I'll just top that off with the syrup. Right, there we go. A jar of glacé chestnuts in syrup. All right, so now these have cooled down. So this is as they came out of the oven, so really sticky now. The syrup, I would say, hasn't gone all the way into the middle of the chestnut. Anyway, tasting time. I don't think these are probably as delicate as proper marron glacé, and I think there are probably several reasons for that. One is that I probably should have pre-cooked the chestnuts. I probably should have found some way to pre-cook the chestnuts to soften them a little bit, to allow the syrup to get all the way in. I think it's also possible that the apple juice, the acidity of the apple juice has reacted in some way and cured these chestnuts in a different way and made them a little bit tougher. And I think maybe I might have thickened the caramel too much. I maybe should have watered it down some more. So if it was a thinner syrup, it might have penetrated better. That said, these are very nice. So let's not call these marron glacé because I don't think I've nailed it. I think we'll call these apple-candied chestnuts. Interestingly, the cinnamon flavour's mostly gone. Maybe a lot of the aromatics from the cinnamon just boiled off during that repeated boiling and standing. So that's the product. Just need to think up an idea for serving this now. That will happen in the future. The future is now. I got big ideas. For instance, take a look at this sweet baby. I developed it myself. You know, for kids. Okay, we're going to make some plantain pancakes, which I think will be an excellent foil for these apple-candied chestnuts. I put the jar in some warm water just to loosen up that syrup a little bit. So for this we just need one ripe plantain, banana for scale, 75 grams of self-raising flour, 75 millilitres of milk, and 1 egg. The plantain, I'm just going to peel it. So plantains are just like a big starchy banana. Less starchy when they're ripe, like this one is. When they're green, they're very starchy, and you can use them almost like you would potatoes. This is not as ripe as they get, but when they're more ripe, they're a bit sweeter and a bit more like a very firm, somewhat fibrous banana. I'm attempting to mash this with a fork. I probably should have sliced it up first. Anyway, so there we go. That's now mashed to a coarse pulp. You could use a food processor for that, but I actually quite like it with a little bit of texture that you get from leaving it a bit coarse like this. Next, the other ingredients all just get piled in. I'll give that a good mix. That's about the right texture, just something that's almost pourable. If that was a little bit too firm, we could have added a bit more milk. If that was a bit too runny, we could add a bit more flour. Just going to cover that and let that stand for about 10 minutes. Non-stick pan, which is now heated up a little bit. Going to give that a very light brush of a neutral vegetable oil, and then just a spoonful of pancake mix. I'll just do 2 to start. Okay, I heard a little sizzle, that's good. Yeah, I'm not going to try and cook more than 2, or else I'll just damage them. And as these cook, we should start to see bubbles appear on the top surface. Not as much as we might do if there were no chunks of plantain in there. Yeah, so we can just see bubbles starting to rise in the mixture now. and get a few more of those, we might get an idea for when these are ready to flip. And these bubbles are coming from two different places, so part of that is just the steam from the moisture in the mixture evaporating and boiling and bubbling up. The other is the baking powder that's in the self-raising flour is puffing up and hopefully making the inside of the pancake fluffy. Just have a little peep under the edge. Not quite ready to turn, I don't think. Okay, I think we might be almost there. So let's just... Oh yeah, not bad. I think it could have done a tiny bit longer on that side, but we can always flip it back. I'm not going to try and fiddle with that. We'll unjoin those when they're cooked. That's what I was trying to avoid by not cooking too many in the pan, but the best laid plans. I think I got away with it. Right, let's just check on the other side. Pretty good. I'm just going to give that one a little bit longer on the first side. I think that one there is ready to come out. So removed to a wire rack, and then the next one can go in. So yeah, bubbles now appearing in the top surface. That is my signal. I don't think that was a moment too soon. Anyway, that's the pancake process. That recipe would have made 6 very evenly sized fluffy pancakes had I been a little bit more careful about measuring, and they're lovely and thick and fluffy. Now we need to deal with the chestnuts. So hopefully that syrup will have loosened up a little bit just from the warmth of that water. So let's get a few of these out. So I'm just going to chop these into nice little slices. So I've chopped most of those up into little pieces. I'll leave one whole for kind of garnish. I made a mess. Let's put it all together. A pancake, a few bits of my apple-candied chestnut, a little drizzle of the spare syrup from the jar, another pancake. Something like that. That also, I feel, needs a scoop of ice cream on it. The whole chestnut to garnish on top. I don't know, like the cherry on the cake, but not. And then some of this syrup, which is going to set when it hits the cold ice cream. And as I say, despite looking like very dark caramel, this syrup is actually apple flavoured. Okay, well, I think that might be the thumbnail. All right, but what does it taste like? It's remarkably good. Interestingly, the fruitiness of the plantain combining with the fruitiness of the apples in here is doing some interesting things. We get the kind of fruit salad vibe. Obviously, that is because we've got 2 different fruits in here, not including chestnuts, which are technically a fruit. Quiet, you can't have this. The chestnuts themselves, I'm going to be honest, they would be nicer if they were softer. And I think that's all down to me. My fear of overcooking them. I didn't parboil them before I put them in the syrup. And I think that has toughened them a little bit. So you live and learn. Maybe next time I'll make proper marrons glacés. But so yeah, they could have been a bit more delicate. As they are, they're like little bits of chewy toffee. Quite nice, but I wouldn't call them delicate. The plantain pancakes, by the way, wonderfully fluffy, but quite moist inside. So that was my experimentation with chestnuts and reduced apple juice syrup. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.